question that shook San Antonio. What if the nightmare Spurs fans have whispered about for 3 decades was suddenly dragged back into the spotlight? Not because of a bad season, not because of empty seats, not because San Antonio stopped loving its team, but because one question refused to die. If the new arena does not happen, could the Spurs actually leave San Antonio? That question is dangerous in this city. It does not sound like ordinary sports talk. It sounds like betrayal. It sounds like history repeating itself. It sounds like a warning siren echoing through every fan who remembers how close this franchise once came to slipping away. And now, the name at the center of it all is a name Spurs fans know too well: Holt. For decades, the Holt family represented stability. Peter M. Holt helped turn the Spurs into a dynasty, the kind of organization other franchises studied from a distance. 5 championships, Tim Duncan, Greg Popovich, a culture built on patience, loyalty, and winning the right way. But in 2026, that same family name started carrying a much heavier shadow. On one side is Peter J. Holt, the current chairman, speaking about ethics, legacy, a new arena, and a future built in San Antonio. On the other side is his father, Peter M. Holt, the former owner, now tied to a shocking legal battle involving his longtime yacht captain, Jay Jones. And that is where this story becomes more than basketball. Because while the Spurs were trying to sell a vision of the future, court filings were telling a darker story from the past. Allegations, denials, a captain claiming he was pressured into dangerous decisions, a former owner claiming he was being targeted and extorted, 2 lawsuits, 2 versions of the truth, one franchise suddenly surrounded by questions. But the biggest question remains, the one fans fear most. Are the Spurs truly safe in San Antonio? Or did the owner finally reveal something fans never wanted to hear? Before we go deeper, comment where you are watching from. If you believe the Spurs will stay in San Antonio, press 1. If you think fans should still be worried, press 2. And subscribe, because this story is only getting more intense from here. The Holt name turns heavy. For years, the Holt name meant one thing in San Antonio: trust. It meant banners in the rafters. It meant stability when other small market teams were constantly fighting rumor. It meant a family that stepped in when the Spurs needed protection and helped turn a vulnerable franchise into one of the most respected organizations in American sports. But the problem with legacy is this: the higher it stands, the louder it echoes when trouble arrives. Peter M. Holt was not just another former owner. He was the man connected to the golden age of Spurs basketball, the era when San Antonio became the quiet machine of the NBA. Under that era, the Spurs were not loud, not flashy, not built on chaos. They were disciplined, they were loyal, they were everything fans wanted their city to represent. Then came Peter J. Holt, the son now leading the organization into a new chapter. His message has been different but connected. Build the future, protect the culture, keep the Spurs rooted in San Antonio, and give Victor Wembanyama a world-class home. That is the clean version of the story. But suddenly, another version crashed into the public conversation. A former yacht captain named Jay Jones stepped forward with allegations against Peter M. Holt. Holt's side denied them and fired back with its own claims. What had once looked like a private dispute became a public collision of reputation, money, loyalty, and power. And for Spurs fans, the timing could not have been worse. Because while Peter J. Holt was trying to convince the city that the franchise was building something permanent, the family name was being pulled into headlines nobody expected. The story was no longer only about a new arena. It was about whether the people behind the franchise could still be trusted. That is what made this so dangerous. Not because the Spurs organization itself had been proven guilty of anything, not because the team had announced plans to leave, but because fear does not always wait for proof. Sometimes fear only needs a headline. And in San Antonio, one headline was enough to wake up an old nightmare: the captain's story. Jay Jones was not some random stranger standing outside the gates. He had been close enough to the Holt world to see things most fans never would. For more than a decade, he worked as a yacht captain, trusted with expensive vessels, private travel, and the kind of responsibility that only comes when powerful people believe you can keep things quiet and under control. That is why his lawsuit landed with such force. Jones claimed the relationship changed from professional trust into pressure. He alleged that he was placed in situations where he felt trapped between protecting his career and refusing requests he believed were wrong. In his version, he was not chasing attention. He was a man who had reached the limit of what he could tolerate. The details in the filing were explosive, but the emotional center was simple. Jones said he felt cornered. He described a world where money, loyalty, and fear blurred together. A job that once looked like a dream became, in his telling, a source of stress and risk. He claimed that saying no came with consequences. He claimed that walking away was the only option left. And once those claims became public, the story escaped the courtroom. Suddenly, fans who had been talking about arena funding were now reading about a former owner, a captain, private travel, alleged misconduct, and a legal fight that seemed completely disconnected from basketball, yet somehow attached to the most important family name in Spurs history. That is the part that shook people. Because sports fans can separate a team from a private dispute, but only up to a point. When the name on the lawsuit is the same name connected to championships, ownership, and the future of the franchise, people start asking bigger questions. What else is hidden? What is true? What is being denied? And most importantly, could this damage the trust between the Spurs and the city at the exact moment the team needs that trust most? Jones gave one version of the story, but Peter M. Holt was not going to let that version stand alone. Holt fires back. Peter M. Holt's response was not quiet. He did not simply deny the allegations and disappear behind a lawyer's statement. His side came back with a completely different story, one that turned the entire accusation upside down. In Holt's version, he was not the powerful man pressuring an employee. He was the target. His legal team argued that the allegations were false and that the real issue was money, leverage, and an attempt to force a payout. That is what made the dispute so explosive. Both sides were not just disagreeing about details. They were describing two completely different realities. Jones said he was pressured and pushed into an impossible position. Holt said he was being shaken down by a former employee using reputation as a weapon. Jones pointed to his fear. Holt pointed to alleged financial misconduct and resentment, and in the middle of it all sat a public image that had taken decades to build. Holt's side leaned heavily on who Peter M. Holt had been: a veteran, a businessman, a former Spurs owner, a man tied to one of the most successful runs in NBA history. The argument was clear. Why would someone with that kind of legacy risk everything in the way Jones described? But Jones's side had its own answer. Powerful people do not always behave the way their public image suggests. That is why the case became so gripping. It was not just about documents. It was about credibility. Which man would a jury believe? The decorated former owner with deep roots in Texas, or the longtime captain who said he had seen a private side of the story the public never knew? For Spurs fans, the legal truth was still unknown. No criminal conviction, no final ruling, no confirmed verdict, only two sides, two lawsuits, and a family name suddenly under pressure. And yet, even this courtroom fight was not the deepest fear in San Antonio, because the city had been carrying another fear long before this lawsuit appeared. The fear that one day, the Spurs might leave. The fear beneath the lawsuit. To understand why this story hit so hard, you have to understand San Antonio. This is not Los Angeles. This is not New York. This is not a city with 5 major teams fighting for attention. The Spurs are woven into the identity of the place. They are not just a basketball team. They are civic pride, family memories, downtown nights, old championship parades, and generations of fans who grew up believing the Spurs belong to them. So when anything threatens the bond between the franchise and the city, people feel it personal. That is why the lawsuit mattered beyond the courtroom. It arrived at the same time the Spurs were asking the public to believe in a massive new vision, a downtown arena, a larger entertainment district, and a future built around Victor Wembanyama. The organization needed trust. It needed patience. It needed fans to believe that this was not just another sports ownership play for money. Then the Holt name entered a storm, and suddenly, the emotional math changed. Even fans who understood that Peter J. Holt and Peter M. Holt were not the same person still felt the weight of the name. Even fans who knew allegations are not proof still wondered what the headlines could do to the franchise's image. And even fans who wanted the new arena began asking a difficult question. If the team really loves San Antonio, why does the city always feel like it has to prove itself? That question is the heart of the story. Because relocation rumors do not need official announcements to become powerful. They grow in silence. They grow when a team plays games in another city. They grow when owners talk about modern arenas. They grow when public funding enters the conversation. And in San Antonio, those fears have history. The Spurs were once vulnerable. The Holts helped keep them home. That is why the same family name now being linked to controversy feels so complicated. The family once symbolized security. Now, for some fans, it symbolizes uncertainty. The old nightmare leaving San Antonio, long before the lawsuit, long before Project Marvel, long before Wembanyama became the face of the future, Spurs fans had one nightmare they never completely buried: the team leaving San Antonio. It sounds dramatic until you remember the history. In the 1990s, the future of the franchise was not guaranteed forever. Small market teams always live with a different kind of pressure. They do not just compete on the court. They compete economically against bigger cities, bigger media markets, and richer entertainment ecosystems. That is why the Holt family's arrival mattered so much. They were seen as protectors, local power stepping in to keep the Spurs from becoming another relocation story. And once the team started winning championships, that fear faded into the background. Tim Duncan made the franchise feel eternal. Greg Popovich made the culture feel untouchable. Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker helped build something that did not feel like it could ever be taken away. But sports history teaches one brutal lesson. Nothing feels permanent when billions of dollars are involved. That is why every new arena conversation carries a hidden threat, even when nobody says it directly. The team says it wants a better building. The city hears, what happens if we say no? That is the non-threat threat. Nobody has to announce relocation for fans to feel the pressure. They only need to know how the business of professional sports work. Teams in smaller markets often say they are committed, but they also ask for modern facilities, public partnerships, and long-term guarantees. San Antonio heard those words and remembered the old fear. Then the Spurs played selected home games in Austin, and fans noticed maybe it was just regional branding. Maybe it was business expansion. Maybe it was nothing more than smart marketing. But to a nervous fan base, Austin looked like a warning. And when the new downtown arena plan became serious, the fear returned with full force. Not because fans stopped loving the Spurs, because they loved them too much to lose them. Project Marvel and the arena gamble. Project Marvel became more than a development plan. It became a test of trust. The idea was bold. A new downtown arena connected to a larger entertainment district, a vision that could reshape the future of Spurs basketball and the city around it. To supporters, it sounded like progress, a world-class home for a world-class young superstar. A building that could help San Antonio compete with bigger markets, attract major events, and keep the Spurs strong for decades. To critics, it sounded familiar. Another ownership group asking the public to help fund a dream that would make private assets more valuable. Another promise that tourism taxes would carry the burden. Another argument that the city had to invest now or risk falling behind. Peter J. Holt tried to calm that fear. He spoke about visitor taxes, not local citizens carrying the cost. He talked about partnership, excellence, and keeping the Spurs in San Antonio. He framed criticism not as betrayal, but as proof that people cared enough to ask hard questions. That was important, because the arena debate was not simply about money, it was about respect. Fans wanted to know that their loyalty was not being used against them. Residents wanted to know the city's needs were not being pushed aside. And the organization wanted to convince everyone that this was not a hostage situation. The vote became a turning point. When the key funding moved forward, it gave the Spurs a path. It gave the arena vision momentum. It also gave the fan base a reason to breathe again. But not everyone relaxed. Because in sports, promises are remembered differently depending on who is listening. Owners hear commitments. Fans hear conditions. Politicians hear economic development. Critics hear risk. And somewhere inside all of that noise, the real question remained. Was this arena about helping the Spurs stay? Or was it about proving San Antonio still deserved them? That is why Project Marvel became the emotional center of the story. It was never just concrete, seats, suites, and scoreboards. It was about whether the next generation of Spurs basketball would still belong to the city that raised it. Wembanyama changes the entire equation. Then came Victor Wembanyama, and suddenly, every fear about the Spurs' future had to pass through one impossible fact. San Antonio had the kind of player franchises spend decades praying for. Wembanyama is not just a star, he is a franchise-altering force. The kind of player who changes ticket demand, national attention, sponsorship value, roster decisions, and the emotional temperature of an entire city. When a team has someone like that, the future stops feeling theoretical. It becomes urgent. That is why the Spurs' rise changed the arena conversation. A struggling team asking for a new building can feel like desperation. A rising team with a generational superstar asking for a new home feels like a city standing at the edge of a new era. The Spurs were no longer selling nostalgia. They were selling tomorrow. Wembanyama gave fans a reason to believe the next dynasty might not be a memory. The defense, the length, the skill, the presence, everything about him made San Antonio feel like the basketball world was turning its eyes back toward Texas. And around him, the organization had begun building real momentum. Young talent, veteran support, a clear identity, a belief that the Spurs were not rebuilding anymore. They were arriving. That matters because relocation fears are strongest when a franchise feels unstable. But a team with a generational player, a passionate fan base, and a major arena plan is not acting like it wants to disappear. It is acting like it wants to expand its roots. Peter J. Holt's language matched that vision. He talked about sustainable winning. He talked about foundations. He talked about excellence on and off the court. Those are not the words of someone publicly preparing an exit. They are the words of someone trying to sell permanence. Still, Fans have learned to listen carefully, because in professional sports, every promise lives beside a business calculation. And even with Wembanyama changing everything, the public still wanted clarity. Not slogan, not polished interviews, clarity. So the real question became unavoidable. What did the owner actually confirm? What was really confirmed? This is the moment where the noise has to stop, because the title makes one powerful promise. The Spurs owner finally confirmed what everyone feared. But when you take away the fear, the rumors, the emotional headlines, and the social media panic, the real story becomes much more complicated. There were actually two fears hiding inside this one story. The first fear was the oldest one in San Antonio: relocation. Would the Spurs leave if the arena project failed? Would the team use public pressure as leverage? Would a franchise that built its identity on loyalty one day decide that another city offered more money, more attention, and a bigger stage? That fear is real, it has history, it has emotion, it is not something fans invented out of nowhere. But did Peter J. Holt confirm that fear? No. In fact, his public message pointed in the opposite direction. He spoke about building in San Antonio. He pushed the vision of a new arena as a home, not an escape route. He connected the team's future to the city, to Wembanyama, and to long-term championship expectations. He talked about excellence, roots, and sustainability. Those are not the words of an owner openly preparing to leave. They are the words of an owner trying to convince a nervous city that the future still belongs there. The second fear was the scandal. That fear came from the legal battle involving Peter M. Holt, the former Spurs chairman, and Jay Jones, his former yacht captain. Jones made serious allegations. Holt denied them and came back with his own accusations. One side described pressure and fear. The other side described extortion and false claims. But again, the word confirmed is dangerous. A lawsuit is not a verdict. An allegation is not a conviction. A denial is not proof of innocence. What exists is a legal fight, not a settled truth. And this distinction matters, because if viewers only hear Spurs owner confirmed what we feared, they might believe the sitting owner admitted the team could leave, or that the franchise itself was proven guilty of something. That is not what the facts show. The current owner is Peter J. Holt. The lawsuit centers on Peter M. Holt, the former chairman. The Spurs organization is part of the public conversation because of the family name, the franchise history, and the emotional timing, but that does not mean the team itself has confirmed the darkest interpretation. So what was actually confirmed? It was confirmed that San Antonio still carries an old wound. It was confirmed that the Holt name no longer feels as simple as it once did. It was confirmed that fans are watching every ownership move closely. It was confirmed that the arena debate is not just about basketball, but about trust, money, civic pride, and fear of losing something irreplaceable. And maybe most importantly, it was confirmed that the Spurs are entering a new era where every decision matters. Because with Victor Wembanyama, this franchise has a rare chance to build another dynasty. But dynasties are not built only with talent. They are built with trust. They are built with stability. They are built when the city, the players, the front office, and the ownership all believe in the same future. That is why this moment feels so heavy. The Spurs have the player. They have the history, they have the fan base, they have the emotional power of a city that truly cares. But now, they also have pressure. Pressure to prove the arena is not a threat. Pressure to prove the team is not using fear as lever. Pressure to prove that the words "por vida" still mean something. So no, the nightmare was not fully confirmed, but the fear behind it was exposed. And once fear is exposed, ownership cannot simply pretend it does not exist. It has to answer with action, with transparency, and with a future that makes San Antonio feel secure again. The verdict and the lesson? So here is the truth after all the noise fades. The Spurs are not just fighting for a new arena. They are fighting for belief. Belief from fans who have carried this team through every era. Belief from a city that sees the Spurs as more than entertainment. Belief from people who remember the championships, the river parades, the quiet excellence, and the feeling that San Antonio had something the rest of the NBA could not copy. That is why this story matters. Because fear does not always come from facts alone. Sometimes fear comes from history. Sometimes it comes from watching other cities lose teams they thought were safe. Sometimes it comes from knowing that professional sports is built on love from fans, but decisions from billion-dollar business rooms. The lawsuit involving Peter M. Holt and Jay Jones remains a separate legal battle, filled with claims and counterclaims. It should be treated carefully because allegations are not verdicts. A responsible fan, a responsible creator, and a responsible community should know the difference between suspicion and proof. But the emotional damage is still real. When a trusted name becomes complicated, people notice. When an arena vote becomes the center of a franchise's future, people worry. When a city hears even the faintest echo of relocation, people react not because they are weak, but because they care. The lesson here is bigger than basketball. Teams should never take their communities for granted. Owners should communicate clearly, honestly, and respectfully. Fans should ask hard questions without losing fairness. And cities should protect both their pride and their people. For the Spurs, the path forward is clear. Build the right way. Stay transparent. Honor San Antonio. Give Wembanyama and the next generation a home worthy of the future. And remember that loyalty is not proven by slogans. It is proven by actions year after year, decision after decision. The fear was real. The confirmation was not. And right now, the strongest evidence points toward a franchise trying to stay, trying to win, and trying to write the next great chapter in San Antonio. If you believe the Spurs belong in San Antonio for life, press 1-inch the comments. If you still think fans should watch ownership carefully, press 2. Tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video with another NBA fan who needs to hear the full story.